everyone, welcome to my Slow English podcast. Today we are going to learn how to use prepositions in, on and at in real life situations through a simple story. When it comes to learning English, I always prefer learning grammar along with reading, writing and listening. I truly believe that English grammar is the foundation of this language. So let's begin. The name of the story is A Day in Rohan's Life. A Day in Rohan's Life. Rohan is the main character in this story. Rohan lives in a small village. We should learn here we use in before village, city, state and country. Rohan lives in a small village and he wakes up at 6 o'clock. At 6 o'clock every morning. We use at before specific times like at 6 o'clock, at 7 o'clock, at 8 o'clock, at 4 o'clock, at 3:30 p.m., at 4 p.m., 4 a.m. Okay, before specific times. In the morning, he gets out of bed. We use in before morning, afternoon and evening. We say in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening. But we say at night. In the morning, he gets out of bed and puts his book on the table. He puts his book on the table. We use on when something is touching the surface. For example, the pen is on my palm. The pen is on my head. Pen here touching the surface of this palm and head. That's why we are using on. Remember, we use on with surfaces such as table, chair, sofa. Then he sits on a chair. Then he sits on a chair and reads for a while. Okay? So repeat. In the morning, he gets out of bed and puts his book on the table and sits on a chair and reads for a while. At 7 o'clock. Again, we used at before specific time. At 7 o'clock, he has breakfast with his family. At 7 o'clock, he has breakfast with his family and goes to school. He keeps his books in his bag. We use in when something is inside. Something is inside of an enclosed place, area or container. For example, bag, box, drawer. Before bag, box, drawer, bottle, pot, bowl, we use in. He keeps his books in his bag and carries them on his back. Again I have used on. Again I have used on. He carries his bag on his back. Why on? Because his back is touching the surface of back. So we have seen the use of on the table, on the chair and on his back. Okay? He carries the bag on his back. He reaches school at 8 o'clock. Again we use at before specific time. Okay? He reaches school at 8 o'clock and sits on a bench. He sits on a bench. At first he puts his book on the table. Then he sits on a chair. Then he carries his bag on his back. And now he is sitting on a bench. Okay, he is sitting on a bench with his friend. Then teacher writes the notes. The teacher writes the notes on the board. So the students write the notes in their notebooks. This is notebook. Commonly we call it copy, but we should call it notebook. Okay, we write in our notebook. Remember, we use at before meal time. Like before breakfast, dinner, we use at. At breakfast time, at lunch time, at dinner time. At lunch time, he eats his lunch in the school garden. Remember, we use in with larger areas like in the garden, in the field, in the playground, okay, in the park. Generally, we use in. He eats his lunch in the school garden and sits on the grass. Again, he sits on the grass. Means he sits on the surface of the grass. Okay, he sits on the grass and he talks with his friends. Remember, we use with when we are doing something together, okay, with another person. Okay, we have seen some uses of with in this story. At first, he has breakfast with his parents. Then he sits with his friend. And now he is talking with his friends. Then he comes home. Then he comes home at 4 o'clock. Again, he comes home at 4 o'clock. In the evening. Then in the evening. I mentioned this that we use in before morning, afternoon and evening. In the evening, he plays cricket in the field. Okay, he plays cricket in the field. So, the sentence is, in the evening, he plays cricket in the field. And later, he studies at his desk. And later, he studies at his desk. Remember, we use at when we want to say that someone is doing something at a specific place. Suppose they are sitting at the dining table. They are waiting at the bus stop. I am working at my desk. At night, I mentioned it earlier that at night, we use at before night. At night, he puts his phone on the bedside table. Yes, on the bedside table. At first, he puts his book on his table. Then he sits on a bench. Then he sits on the grass. And now he is putting his phone on the bedside table. Okay, he puts his phone on the bedside table and goes to sleep at 10 o'clock. At 10 o'clock. That's all for today. If you found this video helpful, subscribe to this channel, hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and thank you for watching.